You're joking, aren't you? It's the Teesside Chef. Chicken chow mein stir-fried noodles made just like a takeaway. One of the few dishes that my ungrateful kids eat without moaning and complaining, but more on my excruciating home life later in the video. And one chicken breast is more than enough for two entitled little brats, which is handy because this whole recipe makes enough for two people. And I've cut along the length of the breast before slicing thin strips against the grain of the meat to give the very best and most tender texture to the chicken when it is eventually cooked to order, because apparently I am the proprietor of a 24-hour food service in my house. Anyway, after decanting the chicken into a little bowl, I'll marinate these tender strips with a tablespoon of light soy sauce, a good pinch of salt, a jolly good pinch of MSG, and a decent little dusting of white pepper. Now, I like to put half a teaspoon of chicken stock powder in, but I suppose that's optional, along with a heaped teaspoon of cornstarch and a tablespoon of tap juice, and of course by tap juice I mean water, and I shall stir this up lovely before letting it sit for as long as possible, which is why I've done this first. And chicken chow mein is as much a logistical challenge as it is a cooking challenge. I'm making sure I have my affairs in order early by chopping 3 or 4 spring onions, first the white end and then the green end, at a jaunty angle with scissors, just because I feel that the resulting rhombus shape, or is it a parallelogram or a trapezium, is much more interesting than a circle to sprinkle over the finished dish at the end. 250 grams-ish of white cabbage, which must be sliced very particularly and pencil thin for fear of being rejected at the table by 2 of the most habitually unsatisfied and, let's be honest, unqualified food critics it has ever been my displeasure to encounter. And for the next step I must sharpen my knife, partly because I live in hope that the wife will plunge it into my back to give me the sweet release of death, but mostly because I have to julienne 2 medium carrots, which means cutting into matchsticks. I peeled the carrots first, of course, and chopped into thirds, and I'm chopping into sort of planks before piling 3 or 4 planks on top of each other and cutting again, which, if I'm careful and I don't take my finger ends off, should give me lots of little thin carrot matchsticks. 3 cloves of garlic to finish the vegetable prep, and you can mince this, of course, but I'm choosing to chop it finely instead for no particular reason, really, and chow mein needs what you'd probably call more of a drizzle than a sauce, with a tablespoon of light soy sauce, a tablespoon of dark soy sauce, which is as much for colour as anything else, a tablespoon of oyster sauce, which gives richness and a hit of umami, 2 tablespoons of water, and a good pinch of salt, and obviously a good pinch of MSG and white pepper, and a generous pinch of sugar, or around half a teaspoon. I don't like to go in too heavy with the sugar, but you do need a little to balance the flavours, and I'm going to put that on standby now while I cook the noodles in generously salted boiling water. I'm going to use around 200 grams of these generic wheat flour noodles. And ideally you're looking for wheat flour noodles or egg noodles that are a little thicker than your typical ramen noodles, and you should cook them until they're about 95% cooked and still al dente, because if you overcook the noodles, they will be rejected and you'll feel like a failure as a parent for not feeding your children, even though they're the problem and not you. And if you're cooking for 2 little Karens in the making like I am, the drained noodles must be placed in cold water to halt the cooking process, to further ensure that we avoid the wrath. And you can already call them to the table now, because the cooking process will not take long, which is why we have to have everything ready to go. Chicken in a very hot pan or wok with a neutral oil. I use the spoon handle to deal with this dish in lieu of chopsticks. I'm told by my brother that chopsticks make me look like a pretentious knobhead, so I never use them, but don't let it stop you. I mean, after all, you probably weren't born into a social structure that eschews anything foreign or exotic, especially if you're a bit younger and more open-minded. And as I set this chicken aside, I have to say that the young ones, for all their faults, are much more enlightened, aren't they? And, it's not as if we weren't little twats when we were young, is it? Get the pan back on the heat, more oil in the crusty pan now for the veg cook, and your pan or wok should be seriously hot now to cook and char these vegetables. For a couple or 3 minutes, they'll still have a lovely crunch when cooked. And the garlic should go in at the end so it doesn't burn, and you want to give the whole thing a good stir before tossing again for another 30 seconds to a minute or so to take the raw edge off the garlic, much like raising 2 girls has taken the raw edge off my philosophy of life, because as I give this chicken back in, they have given me much more than they've taken, to be perfectly honest, but it is occasionally nice to vent to strangers on the internet who happen to have clicked on my video, so thanks for that. And the cooled al dente noodles can go back in now, where they must be tossed into the veggies very comprehensively before we add in our prepared sauce, or more of a drizzle really. And again, in place of the forbidden chopsticks, I'll stir the noodles a little with my spoon handle, rather than anything that's going to squash everything too much. And remember, we still have a searing heat going on here, which will caramelise that drizzle a little and coat the noodles as we toss extravagantly. And once we have a good coverage, we can throw in a couple of generous handfuls of bean sprouts to give even more of a delightful light crunch to our chicken chow mein that you can now prepare for the very most important people in your life. A quick taste test at this point will tell you if you need more seasoning, and this is obviously for you to decide depending on how demanding your audience is. And once you feel the whole thing is good enough for your little princesses or whoever, add a hearty glug of sesame oil to finish. I'm using the light and mild sesame oil here, so I can be a little more cavalier with it, but if you have the darker, stronger sesame oil, be careful not to overdo it. Sprinkle your whimsically chopped spring onions on at the end, where you will surely now be the hero of the dinner table. And seeing their little smiles as they eat their fill of this wonderful noodle dish makes all the perceived pain worthwhile. You'll see. I'll see yous next time, eh?